everyone, welcome back to Flight School. I'm Lily Margolis.
And I'm Rob Linhart.
And today I'm going to learn how to taste wine like a pro.
So Lily, you want to learn to taste like a pro?
I do.
All right. Well, there are a few steps we're going to go through here. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort of take a shorthand version of some of the basic methods that we use as pros, especially when we're tasting blind, and that is we don't know the wine. That's going to help us evaluate a wine, get a sense of what's going on in the glass. And we're going to kind of take, a shorthand version of that, not get into too much detail here, but we're going to practice tasting like a pro. So let's start with a white, because generally speaking, when we're tasting wines, reds and whites, we kind of want to start with the lighter, less intense wines. That usually means whites and rosés and things like that. And then we'll move to the bigger, more robust wines, typically reds and so on.
Is there an ideal way that I'm supposed to hold this glass to maximize the tasting experience?
I would say by and large, yes. But more importantly, there's definitely a way typically to not hold a wine glass, and that's like this. Especially with whites, when you're doing this, when we'll see guys with whiskey and so on holding their glass, they're trying to warm it up a little bit. If our wine is too cold and we're not getting much, we might want to do that, but generally better, hold it from the stem. Don't be adding any extra heat there. And also that gives us a chance to give a nice swirl, nice easy swirl to the glass here. And it looks kind of cool and sexy. So the first thing we're doing is we're gonna swirl, we're gonna open it up a little bit, and then we're gonna look at the color, see what we can get for color. Now it does help sometimes to have something white behind you, and this is more important sometimes with the reds to kind of get a truer sense of the color. But generally speaking, we're not going to worry about that too much. Color, it might tell us something, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Clarity is something else we tend to look at as professionals. How bright, how clear, how cloudy is the wine? But again, if you don't have a specific reason to be paying attention to that, don't worry about it too much.
I hear a lot about legs, but when somebody says that, I just picture a wine bottle with little cartoon legs. And I've never really understood what it meant, so could you explain that to me?
Frankly, there really isn't much information that we get from something like legs. And legs are what you get when you sort of swirl a wine or you tilt it and you kind of hold it up, and you'll see wine kind of runs down the sides and it gets legs. The Germans call that arch a church window, and you watch and see how it breaks. If you're really super massively pro, it might tell you something about the viscosity of the wine or something like that. But honestly, don't worry about it. Not really a thing that you need to be concerned with. And more importantly is, how does it smell? How does it taste?
And does swirling do a lot for the wine?
It often can, yeah. Swirling the wine is going to definitely help to wake it up. It's going to get some air into the wine, some oxygen, get some of the volatile compounds kind of coming out, help to fill the glass, make it easier for your nose to pick up what's going on in the wine. So yeah, a good swirl, definitely important. So when we get our nose in the glass then, first impressions count. Most importantly, what's driving the bus? Does it smell like fruit? What kinds of fruits? Does it smell like non-fruit elements? Something like vanilla, cinnamon, coconut. What might that be?
My first thought was lychee, followed by pear, definitely the cinnamon, a little bit of vanilla, some grass, very fresh and bright, maybe like wheatgrass, you know?
Ah, look
The
at
little-
her
the
getting so
health shots
specific.
out of
Yeah,
that.
awesome.
Definitely elements of that.
Awesome. All right. So here, nothing really dominating the wine. Those vanilla notes, coconut, things like that, pie spices, dill, think oak. Not 100% of the time, but when you get those kinds of tasting notes, you might be able to guess correctly there's been some oak, maybe new oak being used here. So that's a good clue when you're tasting as a pro as to how the wine was made. For the fruits, as a professional, can you narrow it down? You were going with lychee and so on?
Yeah, I said lychee, pear, some apple.
Apple, nice. So a lot going on. You're really picking up a lot. Now, not every wine is necessarily going to show you that much, but again, what's most important, do you like how it smells? At the end of the day, that's what's important. If you want to go full pro and try to break it down, great. But again, do you like it? Don't you like it? That's key. Let's check out the palate. getting a little of that plush note, especially on the finish there. Now, you may have noticed it's very important when you get the wine in your mouth and on your palate, really swish it around. Really get it going around in there, everywhere in your mouth. Get it going all up. If it gets up, back up in your sinuses even, that's not so bad. If you can, draw a little air in over your tongue and bubble that wine over your tongue. Again, that's going to open everything up, get it spread out, maximize the contact of the wine on your palate so you get the most information that you can. Now we're tasting a white wine here. So what do you think when it comes to texture here?
Very smooth for me.
Smooth, that's all right. Smooth is fair. And again, you don't have to have specific descriptors for these things, especially when you're just starting out and you're just learning. One of the things that we look for as professionals that could interest you is what we call body or weight. And it can be a difficult concept to characterize.
What does that mean when you're saying body or weight?
Really, the best way to talk about it is to say it's really just how much just sheer presence does the wine have in your mouth, on your palate. I tend to score wines on a scale from, say, 0 to 5. A 0 is a wine that I put in my palate, and my first thought was, where did it go? Do I even have anything in my mouth right now? A 5 is like a big Napa Cab or a port, something that just feels like it's just beating my palate to smithereens, and then everywhere in between. That's a clue that we can use to tell us things about the wine when we're tasting blind. And a lot of people talk about that. They want that big wine or they want a light wine. And that's really body, but it can be very personal. Any other impressions?
Well, I would, on the weight scale that you employ, I would rate this like a 2. Maybe it feels like it's gonna be on the heavier half for a white, but not super overwhelming, not super heavy, especially in comparison to some of the very heavy reds.
I agree. White wines, by and large, are going to be a lot lighter. Body and weight does typically tend to be quite a bit less than most reds. And of course, we're painting with a broad brush here. But yeah, you can expect whites to be a bit lighter and less body, less weight.
Definitely.
Acidity, acid, very important. What's your take on the acid?
Definitely an acidic wine. I noticed as soon as it was off my palate that I was getting that reaction when you eat like a really sour candy or something and you start salivating, like,
Yeah.
And that's, for me, that's what I look for when I'm trying to determine if a wine is acidic or not.
Right. All good wines, I should say most good wines should have a fair bit of acidity. Wines without acid can be just flabby and boring and dull. Acid gives the wine life. And yeah, it makes you salivate. All right, you want to try the red?
Yeah, let's try that.
Awesome, all right. Now with reds, when we look at the color, we can look at a couple things, and one of them is we can look at rim variation, what we call rim variation. How light does the wine get? It can be very dark, very intensely colored in the middle, but as it gets out towards the rim and it gets thinner, it might start to get a little more clear. For most people, most of the time, not really important that we see that. As professionals, when we're evaluating, that could be an indication of age. The wines tend to get lighter as they age, and the more variation we see, sometimes we can get a really good guess about how old the wine is if we don't know. Yeah, it's a neat trick.
I would have thought it was the opposite.
Ah, yeah. So for the record, all wines get browner as they age as well. Red wines get lighter, they lose color as they age, but white wines get darker and browner as they age, for the record.
Can too much brown in a white that's been waiting to be drunk for a long time, can that be an indicator of an issue with the wine?
Yes, that is actually commonly an indication of a problem. The wine has gotten old, it's gotten tired, it's been oxidized. Brown is generally not the best color for a white wine to be. You might get lucky, but I'd be wary. All right, now the real differences here are going to be in how we characterize the fruit and how we characterize the palate. So what are you getting here on the red?
Right off the bat, very, very overripe red cherries, like very close to going bad, or even some have gone bad. And then secondarily, I would say like wet soil or wet mulch.
Nice. But does it smell bad, or do you like what you smell?
No, it smells good.
Right, so that can be weird to have like overripe fruit or fruit that's almost self-composting in a wine, but I happen to like that, and clearly Lily does too. That is such a personal preference thing. If you're smelling those sorts of things, might tell you something about how the wine was made, might tell you something about how ripe the fruit was when it was picked even. But again, it always comes down to whether you like it or not. That's what's really important. All right, how about the palate? What do you think?
I was expecting different things, but it had a more cottony mouthfeel and a more acidic aftertaste than I thought it was going to. A much brighter flavor than I was expecting based on what I smelled.
Right, so the key there, that's acidity. So white wines we tend to think of as having more acidity, but red grapes can produce a ton of acid. And here's an example of a grape that feels very ripe on the nose, but has really good acidity, right? Kind of a contrast between the nose and the palate that way. For my part too, I was expecting, based on the nose, for this wine to be a lot plusher, a much bigger, fuller bodied wine than what actually comes on the palate. And that's why it's important that we go through these steps.
And can tannins and acidity coexist in a wine?
They absolutely can, and pretty much by definition, they must, especially in a red wine. Acid and tannins will be in that grape, and so they will be in the wine. What's important typically is balance. What you want is the tannins, if you can feel them, that kind of drying feeling that you get, and that can tell you things about how ripe the grapes were, what the winemaker did to the wine, and so on and so forth. But if that's out of balance with the acid, then it just becomes dry and bitter. Acid can balance those tannins. It can flush some of those tannins off of your palate. It gets that saliva going so that the effect of those tannins is sort of mitigated or balanced. If you go too far in either direction, then sometimes it just feels clunky or weird or wrong. Sometimes we can correct that with food, and that'll be for another episode. But yeah, tannins and acid can and do and should coexist in a wine. And when the wine is really good, they're in perfect harmony.
Now I want pot roast for dinner and a glass of this wine.
Pot roast, great match actually. Good tannin, good acid. We do want that roast steak, meat, fat we want for wines like this. And this, for example, by the way, being a Rioja, we're definitely going to be having meat with that. All right. So that is the fundamentals of how we taste as professionals. Now, we know what these wines are. With practice, sometimes you can take all that information, put it together, and guess what the wine is and even how old it is. It's not a party trick. Go ahead and practice, and you might get there.
The most important thing to remember when you're tasting wine is that if you like it, you're right. It doesn't matter what anybody else says about the wine. If you like the bottle, go ahead and buy it and enjoy it the way you want to.
That's the fundamentals of tasting wine like a pro. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to Neyah Margolis and Stelvio for providing us with the wines and expertise for today.
Thanks for tuning into Flight School today. Subscribe to us on YouTube and come flying with us again next time.